Well, it is 10:30 now. I'm going to go ahead and get us started just because I do have a lot of content to cover and I want to make sure I get through as much of it as I can. So my name is Bonnie Brzozowski. I'm a librarian at the Corvallis-Benton County Public Library. If you are new to GoToWebinar, you should have some options on your screen. First, let me share my webcam so you can actually see me and I can say hello to you. There we are. Awesome. So hi, my name is Bonnie. I'm a librarian at the Corvallis-Benton County Public Library. We're going to be talking about misinformation and fake news today. I am recording this session, so you will be able to watch it again. Just a little bit about GoToWebinar if you haven't used it before. You should be able to raise your hand. Raising your hand is kind of to stop me, and then I can touch base and say, hey, what's going on? You can also just write me a question. So if you want to type in a question at any point, please do so. And I'm happy to try to answer those questions. I'm hopeful that we will get through all of the content that I have today, but if not, you will get, just so you know, there are some handouts that you should be able to download. One of them is this presentation, the slides themselves, so you can download those. And then I believe there's two others. Oh yes, the resources list, and those are many things that I've read and used to create this presentation, and then stuff that you can check out later on your own time. And then the logical fallacies chart, which we'll actually talk about here in just a little bit. Okay, so hopefully you can still see my slides. I'm going to move my webcam. Great, and let's dive right in. So just to note that fake news is often kind of considered this sort of new thing that has never existed before, but really it's always been around to a certain extent. And if you think of things like the National Enquirer, for example, the National Enquirer is just full of fake news, just fake stories to entertain. The more sensational, the more entertaining, the more readership they get, that kind of thing. So there always has been some kind of fake news out there, really, almost as long as news has existed. But the big difference today is that now we can spread it rapidly and widely, very easily. So content can travel from producer to consumer in just a matter of seconds without any vetting whatsoever. So that makes everything a little bit different. I also want to point out that fake news really isn't a very helpful phrase, and it doesn't actually describe all the variations in news that you end up seeing that are not exactly fake, but might be misleading. So some examples, some news is simply erroneous. It's not necessarily fake news or intended to be fake. It's someone who just perhaps made some errors, or they made errors in their news reporting. Sometimes it's parody and satire. It's actually kind of interesting how frequently articles that are intended to be parody and satire get retweeted or posted on Facebook and get lots of shares, and people take them as truth. So sometimes it's just simply parody. Some reporting just simply takes things out of context, and so it's not necessarily fake. It's just they've removed some of the context from something, making it misleading and not accurate. Some is just opinion and analysis, and there is a lot of opinion and analysis within news reporting. So being capable of sussing that out is important. The new ease of spreading and consuming information, though, is really bringing a lot of challenges to us, this new speed with which we can share information with each other, right? And that's one big issue is speed versus accuracy. And what we see a lot is that competing news outlets are trying to respond to the pressure of getting stories out fast, often at the expense of accuracy and context, sometimes as well as content. So because when something starts happening, people want that information quickly, and news outlets will jump on that, get the news out as quickly as possible, and a lot of times accuracy suffers. And so sometimes there are a lot of fake news accusations lobbed at some of these news organizations for the way that they reported something initially, which isn't entirely fair, because they're simply trying to get the story out as quickly as possible with the information they have on hand, and that information is subject to change. There's also a huge problem that I think everyone faces, which is information overload. Like, how do we actually find the truth when every day is an information tsunami? It's really challenging. So we've got to be we've got to sort of cherry pick and be particular about the things that we consume and read. We cannot possibly consume it all. There's also a lot of sort of blurring of the lines in terms of business models now with news organizations and websites. So many of the internet business models have proven that there's great profit in producing journalism that sort of abandons standards of neutrality, and they rely on opinion rather than fact. This kind of stuff, stuff that sort of ramps up your emotions, has a headline that provokes a lot of emotion, that's to get you to click. It's sometimes can be called clickbait. I'll get into that later, but it's something that's intended for you to react right away to and click on it. They want you to engage with that content. So a lot of different organizations are going, and websites are going to do things just to simply try to get you to their site, get you to stay on their site, get you to click through. The reason for that is because they can make money when you go to their site through ads, through you looking at ads, through you clicking on ads. They want to keep you on their site as well, because that ad revenue can potentially go up. So that can cause a lot of conflicts of interest, for sure, in terms of good reporting, like a dedication to good reporting versus just wanting you to get on their site. We also have to realize that there's a lot of bias, not only in reporting, but also in the things that we consume and read and engage with. We are all biased. Every single person is biased. And so that bias is going to come out in a lot of different ways. You are more likely to engage with content that reflects your beliefs and tells you things that you already know. You're less likely to engage with content that challenges your beliefs or challenges any of your assumptions or opinions. So that can create a lot of problems when it comes to consuming news and understanding news if you're not really getting outside of your bubble and looking at other things as well. So like I just kind of said, bias is in all news. Bias is a particular tendency, trend, inclination, feeling, or opinion, especially one that is preconceived or unreasoned. One of my favorite books that looks at all the many biases that have been discovered that humans have and act on all the time is called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. It's a really great book, and it really shows you that our intuition is not what we need when it comes to analyzing news. We need slow, deliberate thinking based in fact and reasoning. That is not the way that the internet is really set up. The internet doesn't work in a way that's trying to get you to slow down and think critically. And so that's what we're trying to overcome today, and that's what I know you want to overcome by being here today. So thanks for being here. And then I just like to use this quote. I think about this quote all the time. I have it posted in my office. Challenge the brain and the information it gives you. The brain does not help us be correct. It helps us be efficient. Stop believing everything you think. Again, people who create websites and news companies and advertisers, they know a lot about what makes humans work and how you're going to react to things, and they're capitalizing on that. So step back and sort of stop and think before we start posting things, sharing things, etc. And then I want to point out this great book and just a few logical fallacies. As I said, there's the logical fallacies chart. It's one of the handouts that's attached. Yeah, that you should be able to download from here. And, oh, excuse me. This book is a really good summary of those logical fallacies as well. We have it at the library if you want to check it out. But on that logical fallacies chart, it just kind of shows, and I'll just point out, like, politicians use logical fallacies all the time. So once you start to study them, you'll really be able to see them and call them out. But it's really where just an error in logic is made, or someone is trying to make a logical conclusion that doesn't actually follow logically. So as an example, on the logical fallacies chart you have, it's robots talking about humans frequently. It's a little silly, but like one of the things they say is, if we act nice to humans now, soon they're going to demand constant back rubs. So like, we're nice to them now, they're going to keep wanting us to be nice, maybe even nicer. That's sort of a slippery slope logical fallacy. It doesn't necessarily follow logically that just because you're nice to someone that it means you're going to be nice to them forever, right? That doesn't follow logically. Another one, robots are better leaders because of superior leadership skills. That's a circular argument. Because robots have superior leadership skills, that doesn't that doesn't argue that they're better leaders. So that's just a circle of an argument, not really an argument. So I'd encourage you to take a look at those because they're really enlightening and kind of funny on the chart. But you really do see these all the time. You see not only politicians, but news organizations and other people making these logical fallacies. And then before we really dive into some actual strategies and looking at examples of fake news, we're going to talk about what a fact is. I always just cover this briefly because sometimes there actually is dispute about this. This definition is from the Digital Polarization Initiative. A fact is a claim about which there is general agreement by people in the know. A fact is something that is generally not disputed. It's something that's held by people in a position to know, and it's held by those who can be relied on to accurately tell the truth. So just to cover that really quickly. So I mean, when I'm talking about a fact, we're talking about like who was the last man that walked on the moon. That's a fact that we can prove that there's general agreement on. There's not a lot of dispute about. So facts like that. And then I also want to point out that one of the people often will say that something is fake news simply because it has an error in it, and that's not fair. And because journalists do get it wrong, they are going to get it wrong in terms of, like I said earlier, the speed versus accuracy thing. Sometimes things get misreported simply because we don't have all the facts yet. Sometimes things are just errors occasionally. What's important about a news organization or a website is that they are committed to fact checking and that they're going to correct errors as they find them or as they are pointed out. And they're not going to covertly make changes and update it and not tell you that. They're going to say, like, you'll see like a correction in a newspaper on an online article, and this was updated to reflect X, or this was reported. This particular fact was reported wrong and we've corrected it now. So you want an organization that's committed to those standards. Everyone is going to make mistakes. It's just going to happen. And reporting news is a difficult thing. So we have to be fair to journalists and realize that mistakes are going to be made. It's just how they account for those mistakes that's important, and that shows us what their commitment is to facts. So what we're going to focus on today is learning what we call the moves. This is from a gentleman named Michael Caulfield. He's really famous for, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting what his actual credentials are, but he is famous for creating these classes about strategies you could use to fact check things. And it's really good. There's actually a course that's on your resources for misinfo and fake news handout that should be attached here. I'm also going to send an email with links to all of these handouts again, so don't worry if for some reason you can't download them. But one of those classes is the Check Please Starter course. It's the third link on the very first page. And that is an excellent course that gets into the 4 moves in great detail and gives you lots of examples and lets you try things out yourself. I highly encourage you to try it. Even as a librarian, I found it very informative and useful, and I use it as the basis for this class today. So, excuse me, the 4 moves, keep doing that, sorry, is it's SIFT, an acronym, S-I-F-T, and it's stop, investigate the source, find trusted coverage, and then trace claims, quotes, and media back to the original context. Stop is a pretty easy one, but it's maybe the most important. It's kind of what I was saying earlier. Ask yourself whether you know the website or source of the info and what the reputation of the claim and the website is before sharing it, before doing anything with it. If you're reacting emotionally to something, especially, stop. Like, just stop for a second and ask yourself some questions. What facts are here? What facts can I verify? What facts seem verified? Is this a reputable source? One of the reasons I think that Michael Caulfield and others are asking you to please stop is because a lot of things just get shared because of an emotional reaction. And it's kind of amazing. There's actually been some studies that have been done showing that a lot of things that get shared sometimes on Twitter and Facebook, people haven't even actually read. They just saw a headline, it provoked them to react a certain way, and they shared it. And then they didn't even actually read the article or engage with the content. So that's really problematic, and it's why bad information can get shared hundreds and hundreds to thousands and thousands of times. So we have to stop, we have to ask ourselves questions, we have to kind of relax, take a deep breath, and get into our thinking mind. That's the thinking fast and slow thing. Get away from the biased mind, get away from the reacting mind, and get into the deliberate, slow thinking mind. That's what we're trying to do. And so even further, I investigate the source, know what you're reading before you read it. So ask yourself some questions about the source. We're going to look at some ways to do that soon. Find trusted coverage. So when investigating a claim, you're going to want to look for trusted reporting or analysis of the claim. This can be as simple as just finding a reputable fact-checking organization that has done some fact-checking on that particular claim for you. And then trace, this is the more complex strategy, and it's why it's last, because a lot of times it's not necessarily needed, but sometimes you're going to want to go there, and that's totally fine. And we're going to hopefully look at some good examples with this today if we have time. Trace claims, quotes, and media back to the original context. So you want to trace it back to the source, see if you can find the original context and get a sense if the version you saw in the article you read or what have you was accurately presented. So that's really important. So let's actually look at these. So I kind of already talked about this, so I'm going to move forward, but just a reminder to please check your emotions. Stopping is really important, and the role of emotion is huge in the sharing of fake news and bad information. So please stop. We are all publishers now. We have responsibility. Slow down. And so I want to just kind of give you an example of that, like when you might be sort of provoked to react. And this is a recent thing that was shared on Twitter. It's something from supposedly from the Trump-Pence campaign, saying that you can donate to help the president recover from COVID. So this isn't true, and actually if I had caught more of this screenshot, you'd see that a lot of people were commenting under it. Is this real? I don't think this is real. Is this real? And one of the things that we could do to fact check this really quick, I mean, it depends on how quickly you're looking at it after it was posted. So this claims it was posted at 4:20 a.m. October 2nd. If you're looking at it right then, there may not be a fact check out about it yet. There may not be a news story out about it yet, but you could expect that if a document like this were leaked to anyone, or if this were being sent to supporters of the campaign, people would see it, it would get reported on, it would get news coverage. So if you're only finding it tweeted by some random people on Twitter, this is not news, this is not information that you need to share. This is information that we can absolutely question the validity of and move on. It's meant to provoke a reaction. I mean, just think about like the way he's phrased it. This is sinister and insulting. #TrumpCovid. It's meant to rile you up. It's meant to make you angry. So it's just there to provoke, and it's not there to inform. So investigating the source. This is probably one of the best and easiest things, fortunately, that you can do. Another way that I've heard it phrased, and that librarians tend to talk about it as, is we call it reading laterally. So this is where you don't actually look at the website or the news organization's About Us page to try to decide if they're reputable. They are going to tell you they are reputable on their own site. They're going to do their best on their own site to look legit, look like a place that you should go for your news. You want to look at what other websites and resources are saying about the resource you are using. And we read laterally. What we're looking for is process, expertise, and aim. So we want to find out about that website or news outlet's process, expertise, and aim. Process. So the process, a reliable source for facts, should have a process in place for encouraging accuracy, verifying facts, and correcting mistakes. This is kind of what I was saying earlier, where you want an organization that's committed to correcting and letting you know that they're correcting when they get something wrong, which they are going to get something wrong. Any site that has no corrections on it, like a news site, that should make you feel a little alarmed, a little concerned. Expertise, is the person doing the reporting, or does that organization have a reputation for expertise? We can find this out from other sources, and we're going to look at that soon. And then aim, what the publication author or the media source is actually attempting to accomplish. So we can actually read laterally even about individual authors to a certain extent too. And we're going to look at that too. So let's keep going. Here are some questions that you can ask yourself about a source. This is from the Stony Brook Center for News Literacy. They use an acronym called I'm Vain. and so it stands for independent. Is it an impartial source? Is it an independent source? Or are they funded by a really specific funder that has a specific agenda? If they are, then we might want to ask ourselves some questions about that source, and or just say, okay, well, that's what this source claims, but they're funded by X. So I want to make sure I see other sources that are maybe a little bit more independent, a little bit more impartial. I want to see other sources agreeing with this source. And so that brings me to multiple. Is it corroborated by evidence or other sources? So if they're making a claim, have they cited the evidence, and can you follow it back and see why they would make that claim, and that makes sense to you? Or are you seeing other sources sort of saying, yes, this is a consensus, this is the interpretation, or what have you? And then, is it verifiable? Is it actually something factual that you can verify? And so this is where it gets into being able to differentiate between news analysis and news fact reporting. They can often be mixed together. Sometimes they might inadvertently be mixed together just because, like I said, people are biased, journalists are biased. Sometimes that bias comes out even when you're trying to be objective. So just making sure that whatever it is that you want to verify, or you're getting upset about, or you want to prove, that it's actually a fact that you can go and verify elsewhere, or that they've given you the info to verify yourself right there in front of you. And authoritative informed, is this a knowledgeable source? And then named fully, is the source actually fully identified? Does it identify itself? In other words, do they name themselves? You'd be surprised at how many, I mean, maybe you wouldn't, because so many pages on the internet do not name an author of any kind. And so we need to ask questions, well, who's posting this information? Why are they a knowledgeable, informed person or organization? So that brings me to this idea that there are newspapers of record. These are rigorous newspapers that show they're rigorous in their process. They show attention to detail and have accountability in their editorial processes specifically. They tend to have a national view rather than a highly local view. So usually your local newspaper, though if you're in a bigger city, this might not be true, but if like the local Corvallis Gazette-Times, for example, would not necessarily be considered a newspaper of record because they don't focus on national news. However, they might be a newspaper of record for us locally if we think that they do show attention to detail, have accountability in their editorial processes, etc. But what we're talking about here is that what I want to say is that a lot of different national news organizations get accused of being fake news outlets, and that's not really a fair accusation, because they do have this accountability. They are rigorous and detailed. They do report facts. It's when they get into analysis that they can maybe show a bias of some kind, whether it be liberal or left-leaning or right-leaning. And I'm going to show you some newspapers of records here in a second. But just here's some more information on evaluating news sources. I'm not going to go into this in great detail because I think a lot of it is kind of covered. We've already covered to a certain extent. But if you want to read this over later, please do. Like I said, transparency, expertise, agenda. This is all really important to consider. Something to note is that they often suggest that you approach the agenda last, and that's because it's really easy to see, as I said earlier, easy to see bias in the people you agree with, and it's hard to see bias. It's easy to see bias in people you disagree with and hard to see bias in people you agree with, but bias isn't an agenda. So bias is just about how people see things. So sometimes it can just be hard for us to understand agenda when we have that bias in mind. So try to look at the other aspects first and then move to agenda. So this is specifically for evaluating news sources. We're gonna look at strategies for looking at other sources as well. We've looked at some already, but here's some specifically just for news sources. And then, as I said, I would tell you some of the newspapers of record. So this list, it includes things like the New York Times, the Washington Post, etc. There's some other English language newspapers of record that are international that are listed there. It kind of depends on who you ask who a newspaper of record is, but in general, even the Boston Globe, Miami Herald, Chicago Tribune, those could all be considered newspaper of record. So these are newspapers that do have a good editorial process. They are committed to factual reporting. So whenever they report a fact, we can generally rely on them to have tried to get it right and to cite their source so that we can go and fact check them really easily. So that's why people rely on publications like these, and it's just not 100% fair to say everything in the New York Times is fake news or everything in the Boston Globe is fake news. That's just not really a fair accusation or assertion. But as I said, every newspaper has bias. Every news outlet has bias. And so this is a chart. You can go and look at it in more depth if you want at the link below. It's Ad Fonte Media, Fontes Media. I'm not sure how you say that actually, but this just sort of shows you over the spectrum who's a little bit more neutral, who's more left, who's more right, because you are going to see that bias in their analysis for sure. Most people consider the AP and Reuters and C-SPAN to be about as neutral as you can get in terms of news, though they have shown bias too at times as well. I'm not sure you're going to find a source that's just 100% neutral at all times. But that's why we go in with our lens of knowing that bias exists everywhere and looking for the facts and looking for people who have cited their facts. But I mean, even like you can find really great facts in Fox News articles, even though people often accuse Fox News of being very hyper right. But if you are just looking at their straight news reporting, they definitely do a good job of factual reporting and of citing their sources and making corrections. It's when you get into listening to specific pundits or looking at the analysis where you're going to see that bias come into play. Something to look out for is that there have been a lot of bogus local news sites out there. So like I said, there are people, or maybe I didn't fully explain this earlier, but there are people out there who have created actual fake news websites just putting out totally fake stuff. Sometimes they'll include some legitimate stuff to sort of make it look like they're kind of legitimate. And then often what we've been seeing is that they've been plagiarizing legitimate news sources using really old articles of theirs as their legit stuff, and then churning out a bunch of fake stuff as well. So they tend to deliberately be promoting false claims. And the reason that they're so successful and use this appearance of a local news site is because people tend to trust local news quite a bit. Like I do trust the Gazette Times quite a bit on local reporting. They're the only ones doing it. They have reporters dedicated to it. Is it perfect? No, not always, but it's my best source for local news. If a competing site came out and was saying, oh, this is Corvallis News, that might stand out to me or confuse me and cause me to share a fake news site. So just to point out that you can read more about this, and this was an expose that BuzzFeed News did several months ago, and it's just something to pay attention to. So when we're investigating a source, what we can do first is find out what other websites or what other people are saying about it. And so one way to do that, I have an example here in the slide under, for example, use the search syntax. So if we were to go into Google or DuckDuckGo, if that's your preferred search engine, whatever search engine you use, it doesn't matter. If you type in, so say that you've read something on a website called BaltimoreGazette.com, and you want to know more about the BaltimoreGazette.com. Is that a legitimate local news site for Baltimore or not? How would you find that out? One approach is to try this. Type in BaltimoreGazette.com. So what that's going to do is ask the search engine to search for BaltimoreGazette.com, that little phrase, and then type the minus sign, and then the word site, S-I-T-E, then a colon, and then BaltimoreGazette.com. So what that's going to do, this site thing, the minus site, it's going to search for the term BaltimoreGazette.com everywhere except for at the BaltimoreGazette.com website. So it's not going to return any results from BaltimoreGazette.com. It's going to show you what other websites are saying about BaltimoreGazette.com. And indeed, I haven't done this search in a while, and things change on the internet all the time, so I can't promise you how well this search is going to turn out at this point. But that was a local news site that was a fake news site. It was created to share fake news. And when you did that search just several months ago, you got a lot of sites telling you that it's a known fake news site, including Wikipedia, which is trying to do a collection of known fake news sites. And this site doesn't even exist anymore because once they get outed as a fake news site, they're far less successful sharing fake news. So they tend to just shut themselves down. And then I would imagine they just try to reinvent themselves as somebody else, like ChicagoGazette.com or something like that. So the only thing is that sometimes if it's on a newer site, or maybe not much has been said about that site, you might not get any useful info that way every once in a while. So for smaller websites with less said about them, you can always try a who is search. And so a who is search, it's just a way of seeing who owns a particular website. The only thing with that is that people do tend to mask their identity because they know that this publicly searchable directory exists. So they tend to, like, even when I had my own personal website, I paid to have my identity masked just because I don't want random people contacting me. And so that's what this particular site did. That's the circle there. That's why it says the organization that owns it is Domains by Proxy. That's someone that you would pay to sort of mask your identity, basically. And it's not necessarily suspicious, but it doesn't give us really any useful information about that organization. So that's what I'm saying. Sometimes this works well and sometimes it doesn't. But what was interesting about this particular one is it did tell us over to the right of your screen under important dates, it says that this site wasn't created until July 2015. And the reason that's interesting is because most local news websites or local news outlets have had a website for quite a long time, much longer than 2015. It's actually a little odd for a long-standing local news outlet to all of a sudden in 2015 be like, hey, we'll get a website, why not? Like, they've more than likely had a website for a long time if they're or pretty good long time for if they are a legitimate local news site. So that right there, it's not necessarily, that wouldn't tell me, oh, this is definitely fake news, but it would definitely make me a little suspicious of the site if I didn't have any other information. Then I might be like, well, who else is saying this? What else can I find that makes this claim? And I want to point out the nature of scientific research. Scientific knowledge is always tentative and subject to revision should new evidence come to light. However, the news media really does report any individual scientific study as if it's truth and fact. And so that's why sometimes people get a little upset, like, coffee's good for you, coffee's bad for you. We see research coming out to arguing one or the other all the time. But in fact, it's not. One study is very rarely going to tell us anything scientifically. It's just a drop in the bucket. What you need for a scientific consensus is lots of research, or a study that included many people and was maybe over a long period of time that could actually prove that something is definitely always this way. Yeah, so hopefully that helps, because I'm just surprised at how many people are like, well, this must be true because this one scientific study says. One scientific study is not enough to tell you anything at all. It's interesting, it's a data point, but it is not a consensus, it is not a fact, it's perhaps not something that you should even act on. So just something to consider. So with that in mind, like, I do get a lot of questions about, like, well, how would you decide if a particular article or study is a good one? And we can do that. And actually, there's this thing called impact factor. And impact factor basically is a number that can kind of tell you whether or not a journal has any credibility in its particular field. The tricky thing with impact factor is that the actual number can mean different things depending on the field you're looking in. So for example, an impact factor of like 30 might be really high in one field, but might be sort of on the low end of reputability in another field. It's kind of hard to explain, but that's just sort of the way that it works. So when I'm saying let's search for impact factor, we're just looking for any number. So if it has any impact factor at all, and we can find that number, we're going to say, okay, it's considered, this journal is considered legitimate by the academics that would be interested in it, or the academic field of study that it's in. So for example, I came across this article here from the journal BMC Obesity. It's sleep and weight loss in low-income, overweight, or obese postpartum women. So what I could do to try to find out, like, is this even a legitimate journal? Would people interested in obesity or sleep, would they even use a journal like this or think a journal like this is worth citing? Because there are journals out there that don't have any peer review, are really just out there because a certain company or corporation is funding them. And so that would kind of indicate it has some kind of bias. A lot of times people in that academic field wouldn't really count on a journal like that if it's funded by Johnson & Johnson, for example, or Procter & Gamble, I mean. So if we were to search BMC obesity impact factors as the name of the journal, adding impact factor at the end, we would actually get a number. And this actually only works for Google, I should say too. Google's the only one that does a good job of this. And when we did this search a few months ago, this had an impact factor of 17. Like I said, the number doesn't really matter. It just shows us, hey, some people think BMC obesity is a legit journal. So okay, like I said, we wouldn't want to take what this study says as absolute fact. We want to see more studies like it, sort of coming to the same kind of conclusions to say, oh, there does seem to be some kind of consensus here, but it at least like lends some legitimacy to the actual journal we're looking at, and we can say, well, hey, this reputable journal did say this, and then we can talk about it that way. Another thing that you can do to sort of evaluate journals, actually this should probably more say evaluating authors of journal articles, is use scholar.google.com. And Google Scholar is a search engine for academic journals and articles. And so you can, if you were to search for an author's name at scholar.google.com, you can find a lot of, ideally, you would find that they've published a number of articles. So one of the authors on the study I just showed you, his name is David Ban. And when I did a search for him, I got a lot of different articles that were written by him. Now that could mean that like he's only been published in journals that we would find suspicious or to have a real specific agenda, and so then maybe he wouldn't be that great of an author. But what you can, if looking even closer, like it's going to tell you how many people cited, or how many journal articles have cited that particular article, and then also where that article came from. And so what was interesting is this particular author has lots of citations. So one of the articles that he wrote was cited by at least 100 other articles. Many were cited by 20, 10, 11. So he's definitely been cited a lot. So that's kind of interesting, and that might say he's a legitimate researcher in his field. But then also, like just right off the bat, you can tell that he's published in a lot of reputable places. So NIH.gov, that's the National Institutes of Health, so that's a pretty reputable place to get published. OxfordJournals.org, that's pretty reputable. And so, I mean, but even if we weren't sure, we could go on and look at the actual journals that he's published in. Like one of them, I think, is the American Journal of something. We could look at the impact factor and make sure that these are journals that have impact factor. So hopefully that helps. So just a little bit of a way of like how you can actually analyze authors of journal articles and journals themselves. Something that can be really tricky to investigate the source of is Twitter, verifying Twitter identity. And that's because there are things like fake screenshots. And so here's a really good one for you. As you can tell, I bet you can imagine that Barack Obama did not author this tweet, and you would be right, he didn't. I did. So just to show you how easy it is to just get a little screenshot of a tweet, I could share this far and wide, and who knows who might be duped by it. Hopefully not many people, because it's a little silly. But this is really common. The reason that people do it is it makes it easy to just share a tweet, though you can always link to it, but it makes it easy, like in a news article you're writing or whatever you're writing, to be able to just have that little screenshot. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that people use screenshots, but it does mean that they've now taken this totally out of context, and if you really want to make sure that it's valid, we would need to make sure other people are talking about it, like other news organizations are talking about it, and or go and look for the tweet itself. To do that, I mean, you could go and check to see if the tweet exists on Twitter first. So what I would do for this particular fake screenshot is I would probably type in, Bonnie is the best librarian in the world, and then I would type in @Barack Obama. And that would more, if that was a tweet that was still in his, like if he didn't delete the tweet and it still existed on Twitter because he didn't delete it, it should come up as a link in my search results. And so that's because everyone on Twitter has an @ and then whatever their handle is. So and his is @ Barack Obama. So that's one way I could. The thing is though, is that tweets get deleted, right? And so if it got deleted, I'm not going to find it. Unfortunately, there isn't an archive of all deleted Twitter tweets, but there is deleted tweets for all politicians are being collected by ProPublica.org. It's called PolitWhoops. You can go and search it anytime, and you can see lots of interesting things that politicians have deleted. You can also go and see all the things that they said about a specific person or event before everything maybe changed or consensus on it changed and they deleted all those tweets. So it's kind of interesting. And like I said, controversial, news breaking, et cetera, tweets generally are going to be discussed in the news. So if you're only finding this little tweet screenshot in one place and it seems really notable, that should be kind of fishy to you. Another thing to point out is that Twitter has tried to, what do they call it now? I'm blanking on it, but they've authenticating? They basically like try to tell you who is a legit person on Twitter, and they do that by adding this little blue circle with a white check mark in it. And so you can kind of see it here. So the one on the far right, Jack Kimball, I don't think his Twitter exists anymore, but he was a known fake. Well, it took a while for people to know it, but he was a fake account. He said he was a congressman from California's 54th district. There is no 54th district in California. And then if you looked closer, like he has, so a politician, a musician, really anyone like of public interest can get a little verification. Gosh, I'm blanking on what that thing is called. Can get that little verification check mark, circle and check mark. So you see Jason Chaffetz on the bottom left, and he has one. You can see right next to his name, and that's where it should appear too. So note that next to where it says Jack Kimball on the right, that little symbol doesn't exist, but next to Jason Chaffetz, it does. So it doesn't mean that what he's saying is legitimate. It just means that that's actually him. And the problem with that is that like tons of people on Twitter will try to impersonate. So that's why like President Trump's Twitter is I think his is @ real Donald Trump, or I think it's real Donald Trump. It's probably because there are other people that have gone on and said they're Donald Trump. So someone probably owns the Donald Trump handle, and so he had to be real Donald Trump. So that's why you see stuff like that sometimes. I thought this one was just kind of funny in the middle, and it's the way people try to impersonate that little white check mark with the blue circle. And it's the one in the middle, and this is an account for someone named Percy Jackson. Percy Jackson is a fictional character, and so they put it in, you can kind of see how this picture's a little different in the middle. That's because that's their cover photo. They have like a cover photo and then their little profile photo on the side. The Jack Kimball and Jason Chaffetz is the profile on the side. So this person intentionally put just somehow like photoshopped that little circle into their cover photo so they could appear legitimate. But there is no Percy Jackson because Percy Jackson isn't real. So that right there could maybe tip you off, but might confuse others. So what if the account is not verified? So the reason that, I don't think I've mentioned it, but the reason that this is so important is, oops, I'm good at doing that, is because there are so many accounts out there that are, I need to get this out of my way. Okay. There are so many fake Twitter accounts out there. It's really common to have Twitter bots, and Twitter's been trying to get rid of them, but I don't think it's ever going to be possible. There's always going to be lots of bots. But sometimes you'll hear a report from Twitter, we deleted some million accounts that were all bots. So these are accounts that are usually have some, they often will have some sort of real person presence, but it's also just a lot of automated stuff too. And it's meant to amplify specific messages and to try to get people to retweet and share information that they're trying to get out there for whatever reason. So there's other things that you can kind of look for when an account is not, is it called verified? Forgetting what that blue circle and white check mark is, and I'm sorry, it's bothering me. But other things that you can look for if the account is not verified, or you have any questions about whether or not this is a real legit account, these are the things to sort of look for, is the start date. So when did they sign up for their Twitter account? Usually older accounts are more trustworthy. An account that was just created a month ago and is posting like 20 times a day, that's pretty suspicious right there. It's like, well, who is this person that has all, and then also the content of their tweets would perhaps be a flag too. Are they just tweeting the same thing? Or like one Twitter bot, for example, was tweeting in 20 different languages. Like, do you really, and they were tweeting like 20 to 30 times a day. So does that seem like a real person? Does someone who knows like 6 to 20 languages, are they really just sitting on Twitter tweeting 20 to 30 times a day on politics? It's probably unlikely. It should definitely raise some red flags for you. Another thing you look at is followers. Do the number of followers seem about right for that person, for that person's popularity? Do they have any followers you know, for example? Like, do you recognize any of their followers? Not like people you know individually, but like, for example, like maybe celebrities you're familiar with, politicians that you're familiar with, like other publicly notable people, perhaps follow them, though that might not necessarily be a reason to trust it. It's something you can definitely look for and can sort of lend itself to arguing whether it's a legit account or not. You can also look at their previous tweets, as I said. Are there many previous tweets? Are they what you'd expect from that account? Do they have conversations with people on Twitter in ways that you'd expect, or is it kind of weird? Like, is the language odd? Is the language use odd? Things like that. So those are just a few things that you can kind of look for. Just note that not all Twitter accounts are legitimate, and a lot of them exist to put out misinformation. So just always do some second looking when you're gauging whether or not someone is a good person to be listening to on Twitter. Something else that you can do to investigate the source is check for page changes. And this is really just to see like, how has a page changed over time? And sometimes it's a good way to check to see if a news organization has changed an article over time without informing anyone in any way, without saying that they changed it for some reason and what they changed. So this is just a really simplistic example, but there's this site that you can do this at. It's called the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine. Plug in a URL. In the example, we did whitehouse.gov, and we looked at it all the way back in '99. But so the Wayback Machine has a bunch of different dates where they may have got a snapshot of that website, and so you can kind of look back and see like, well, how has this changed? So sometimes that's just a way to get a sense of what that web page is doing and why, and if there's anything sort of weird or fishy about the way that they're changing their information on their website. And I want to point out that always when you're investigating a source is that a lot of people will just say, oh, it's a nonprofit. They'll find a nonprofit and they'll say, oh, it's a nonprofit, so they must be telling the truth, they must be accurate. But there is this thing called astroturfing. It's a practice of masking the sponsors of a message or organization to make it appear as though it originates from and is supported by grassroots participants. This is actually pretty common. So whenever you're deciding whether an organization is astroturfing, or just in general, and this works for investigating pretty much all sources, and we've talked about it before, ask yourself, who funded this? Who founded it? What interest might that group have in the action or initiative being proposed? Do they have a specific interest in something being a specific way? So once you've sort of asked yourself those questions, you might be able to get a sense of whether or not you want to lend any credibility to that particular organization. And then, I mean, oh yeah, are we on the next one? Yeah, wonderful. Okay, F, find trusted coverage. So this is really one of my favorite strategies because I actually think it's easier than people think it is, and that's because there are so many organizations at this point doing fact checking out there, so many, and great websites doing it. And even if we can always search a fact-checking website to see if we can find out if anyone has fact-checked specific claims. But we don't even have to accept what that fact-checking organization says in terms of, because they're going to say like, oh, this is true, this is mostly true, this is not true at all, whatever. we don't have to accept that finding, but if we read what they did, they're going to show their work. They're going to tell you how they came to that conclusion. You can then go and follow all of that yourself and decide if you agree with that conclusion or not. So basically, they've done the legwork for you. Like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel frequently. Like, let these trusted professionals do this work for you. Find the fact-checking sites that you prefer to use and use them. I have a list on your resources page. It is on, let's see, it starts on page 4. It is from the Web Literacy, a book called Web Literacy for Student Fact Checkers by Mike Caulfield. This is where I found this list, and it's a list of reputable fact-checking organizations. So if you're not familiar with a lot of fact-checking organizations, take a look at the resources list, and there's a lot there that you can engage with. And so let's actually talk about searching some fact-checking sites, and I have some kind of ways that you can do this. There's lots of ways you can do this. Here's an article that got shared quite a bit many months ago. Somali community leader drops bombshell. Ilhan Omar did marry her brother to get him papers to keep him in the US. So what if you want to find out, is this true? Like, how would we verify it? There's lots of ways that we could do this, but what if this particular claim was talked about so much that you could be like, okay, well, someone has surely tried to fact check this. Like, can I go to a fact checking site and find out what's going on? So yes, let's do that. One way that you can do this, and this is me using our little cite colon thing again, but in a different way. So if we were to try this search syntax, and we were to type in to Google, DuckDuckGo, wherever you want to use, Omar, marry brother. We could have used other terms there too, but that's just what I chose. And then what I'm doing here is I typed in cite. Notice I did not use the minus sign. So cite : Snopes.com, and then or cite : PolitiFact.com. What that's going to do is that is going to limit this search to only Snopes.com, a fact-checking site, or PolitiFact.com, a fact-checking site. It's going to look for the terms Omar, marry brother only in those two websites. So I should only see search results from those two websites. So it's not going to search the entirety of the internet. It's just going to search Snopes, just going to search PolitiFact.com. So this cite : and then you put in the web page, that will always search just the site that you specify. If you want to do several sites, you do have to connect them with an or, O-R. And I have found in Google, you do have to capitalize the or, which is silly, but in DuckDuckGo and all other search engines, you don't. And that's kind of a weird artifact of later times when Boolean operators were important, which we're not even going to get into because it's not relevant here. But or is a Boolean operator. It's just a way of linking search terms together, and it needs to be capitalized in Google. And again, and if we did the search, we would find fact checks showing how this was not accurate. Here's something that was in a speech that President Trump made in 2016, and a lot of people talked about this. And the number of officers shot and killed in the line of duty last year increased by 56% from the year before. And people found this very alarming and wanted to find out about it. And so again, because the president said it, it was something that stood out to a lot of people. A lot of people were going to fact check this, and they did. So if we were to do a search, officer deaths 2016 increased 56% from 2015. It's pretty specific, but that's what I threw in there. And then this, the way that I have it constructed, would actually search 4 different fact-checking sites. So cite : factcheck.org or cite : Snopes.com, etc. I included Washington Post there because Washington Post has a fact-checking arm of its website, but there's not a way to just search it specifically. So I searched all of Washington Post. I'm not necessarily saying that everything that the Washington Post posts is a fact check, because it's not. It's news reporting and analysis. So, but if you did do this search, you would very quickly find that I think all 4 of those fact checked this and more. And it's true. It was true. So here's a way that we can use that cite : little trick in a bit of a different way. So I intentionally chose a search term that I thought could be controversial, because people have really different attitudes about it. And so people have a lot of very different attitudes that tend to be very politicized about labor unions. So if you do a Google search for labor union effects, just anything the internet wants to show you, I did this in Google. The first thing it does is it shows this little snippet, is what it calls it. You can kind of see that just underneath it in grayed out. It says about featured snippets. Under the little top there. It says union raises the wages of their members, both by forcing consumers to pay more for what they buy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you read that those two statements, that's pretty inflammatory language, and that's a pretty strong attitude towards labor unions. And when Google gives you a featured snippet, like the one I've circled here, what they're kind of saying is this is the answer. Like Google has talked about before, how it wants to give you the answer to any question you ask right when you just type it in. And so that's what the snippets are intended to do. They're intended to give you the answer, right? And if we really like dive into that, we can talk about how problematic that really is, because the whole of human knowledge isn't just answers. Human knowledge is really complicated, and not everything has an answer, right? And so if we type in labor union effects, like we should see a wide variety of sources. And indeed, if you actually look further down that page, there's some not terribly bad information below that we could have dived into. But say that we are not particularly knowledgeable, or we're just prone to take whatever Google throws at us, and we took this as fact, we would be taking this particular snippet that they pulled from a right-wing conservative think tank that's funded in part by the Koch brothers, who are very anti-union and known to be. They've created many organizations to fight unions specifically. So it's not real. That's not good information. That's not information that we should take as fact. We need a lot more information to decide what the effects of labor unions are. And granted, my search terms are incredibly vague. So the idea that like you can answer this query I've made with those two statements from a right-wing conservative think tank is really kind of silly. And so it's just sort of trying to show you how Google can be a little iffy in the stuff that it returns sometimes. It's not trying to give you the best possible answer to your question, actually. The way the algorithm works, it prioritizes things that are popular and things that have been linked to frequently from other places. And that's just two factors that it uses to decide relevancy. And we actually don't even fully know how the Google algorithm works, because Google won't release that information because they consider it intellectual property. So we can probably just bet that this is something that gets clicked on a lot, engaged with a lot, linked to a lot. It's a message that has been amplified, and perhaps amplified well. And part of that might even be because the Koch brothers are very, they have a lot of money, and they have a lot invested in having people feel this way about unions. So, lots that's problematic there. Let's get the search done a different way though. So say that we do that exact same search, then say we put a space and we type in site:.edu. What that's going to do is that's going to limit it to all of the .edu domains. So what that means is any university or college, they are given a website that is, so for example, with Oregon State University in town, it's orgonstate.edu. That is an educational institution. Generally, the information on their site should be a bit more reputable than what we would find on a biased think tank's website, right? So if we would throw that in, the site:.edu, it's going to limit it to just all of the websites for educational institutions. And that might be interesting, because we might find policy papers written by academics. We might find, I think if you, do I have it on here? Yeah, if you go down, yes, it pulls up the Labor Center at Berkeley, which is a center devoted to kind of studying the impact of labor unions, benefits, wages, safety net programs, all of that. So that's a really interesting place I didn't even know existed until I did this search. And so that's awesome. We also get things like labor unions as activist organizations, a paper from Harvard that looks like that is a journal article. I mean, that's sometimes what we're going to uncover through this. It might be interesting to throw this search into Google Scholar actually and see what we get there, and look at some scholarly articles as well. Again, we would want to, kind of evaluate each of those journals to a certain extent, depending on how much we want to rely on those journals for what they're saying. But this just automatically sort of, it's going to, not all search terms that you use are going to lend themselves well to doing a search like this, but it just sort of changes those search results to something that can be a bit more relied on just right off the bat without having to do all of that guesswork of who is the source, why are they legitimate, what's their agenda. I mean, granted, like there's going to be bias in academia as well, but it's going to be they're going to be a little bit more transparent and easy to assess. And so this is just going over what I just said. You can always search a specific domain using that cite : trick. You can search .edus, you can search .gov as all government organizations in the United States specifically. So you could try that. You could always do .org, though .org is not really such a useful one anymore. .org used to really be more reserved for nonprofit institutions, but now .org is really being used by lots of different organizations. And as I said before, lots of nonprofits can kind of pose to look a little bit more legitimate than they actually are. So, but sometimes that might be interesting because you might be interested in what nonprofits have been doing about a particular topic. And sometimes nonprofits will have very lengthy papers and analysis and research that you might be able to uncover. So it might be worthwhile sometimes. And I just want to point out that Wikipedia gets a really bad rep, but it actually does have a lot of really useful information on it. And where that information is good is in the references, further readings, and external links. It's often a treasure trove of information. I tend to turn to Wikipedia when I want a consensus viewpoint, because it's often good about representing what the consensus viewpoint on a particular topic is, or when I'm really like, I have no idea where to even start with this topic. So I'll start here, I'll dig through their references and their further readings, external links, etc., and try to see if I can find a good site. Wikipedia does have really pretty rigorous standards for what constitutes a good reference, further reading, and external link. And I actually have it somewhere in your resources page because it is so good. Their standards for evaluating sources. So generally when they cite a source, they cite a good one. So it's worth taking a look. You can usually find some good stuff there if you want to start there. And then I want to point out that all of this cite : stuff I've been telling you about, some people find it annoying to have to put that in. And there is the Google Advanced Search. It's not super easy to find on the Google homepage. Even blanking on how to find it right now. Let's find it really quick together. But what it will let you search by site or domain there without actually using the site thing. Oh yeah, you have to type something in because it doesn't give you the advanced search right away. And I want to say it's under settings. You'd think it'd be under tools, but it's not. And so hit advanced search. We're looking at it now. It went ahead and plugged in my words there. Take it out. But here we could search exact phrases if we want, but you can also do that by putting things in quotes. What I think is really useful about the advanced search is it does show you how to just do these things without having to use the advanced search. So like it's saying here, just put the exact words in quotes and you'll get it, but you can also come here and do it here. And so this is kind of shows you how to use that minus sign in a different way than we used it before with the site search, but that's a possibility too. The example they use is really good. But this is where you can search by site or domain. So for example, we want to limit it, they give you some good examples. You want to limit it to Wikipedia, just throw in wikipedia.org. You do not have to use the cite : thing here because that's already doing it. And then you can also search .edu, .org, .gov, etc. So you might poke around in there if that is of interest to you. I just want to show you where it is because sometimes people forget. And that's why I include the link up here, is because I even tend to forget where it is. They used to make it easy to find and they keep hiding it. They don't want you to use their advanced search for some reason. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but I want to show you a few. We've got to treat those Google Answers and Google Snippets with a lot of suspicion. When it comes to straight facts, it's pretty good. When we ask things like how many men landed on the moon, when's the last person to walk on the moon, we get an entirely good answer. They're not necessarily from the best sources, but we can probably count on Wikipedia to know who the last person to walk on the moon is, unless someone just very recently has been doing some creative editing. Generally, that stuff gets caught really quick though, so I would guess that Wikipedia would probably have this accurate almost all of the time. The other one cites Quora. Quora is like a crowdsourcing answers kind of site. So basically anyone can post a question and then anyone can answer it. I think they do sometimes try to have experts answer, but I mean, Quora in general is not necessarily a site that I would suggest or that I would take as authoritative. However, it's such a straight factual question that I'm willing to take it, and these are both accurate responses. Well, let's see where this gets really iffy. So how many apostles were there? This one says there's 12, but that really depends on the culture. That's a really simplistic answer. That's actually a pretty complicated question if you dive into it. So just pointing out that there's a lot of false simplicity in Google Answers because they're just trying to give you an answer, but not necessarily trying to tell you about all the nuances of that answer. Sometimes it's blatant misinformation, as in they actually changed this so you can't do this search and it do the same thing anymore, fortunately. But presidents in the KKK, it used to actually show 4 presidents that were in the KKK. There is no historical evidence whatsoever that any presidents were in any way associated with the KKK. So it's just completely false information that probably got amplified a bunch online. And so Google was like, oh, everyone is saying it and linking to it, so it must be true. We're going to put it at the top. Just kind of, an example of how crowdsourcing knowledge sometimes doesn't go so great. And then just a sort of a simplistic one, like we ask how old was Lee Harvey Oswald at the time of the assassination, and you get a bunch of numbers highlighted in that little blurb, but none of them are actually answers to the question you asked. You would need to do a little bit of math there to find out for yourself. There's a lot of examples of this. You can provide feedback about these results. I don't know if you can see it, but under each one, this is about this result feedback. And in fact, I've provided feedback about many of their of these, but they don't always change them right away. I want to point out something else, which can make it a little bit difficult to find trusted coverage sometimes. It's just simply the way that we phrase searches. Our confirmation bias can be really problematic. So here's an example. If we do a search for MSG sensitivity, we get a pretty legitimate source and explanation of what that is. However, if we do a search for MSG dangers, we get a very poor explanation of what that is, and then a bunch of pages under it that suggest very harmful effects from MSG. And so why would you see this difference? The difference is that Western medicine doesn't think MSG is dangerous, but it knows or thinks that some people are sensitive to MSG. And so you might experience MSG sensitivity, but you're not going to experience any dangers from MSG. So when we search for MSG dangers, we're actually just getting all those sites that say MSG is super dangerous and you could be very hurt from it, when in fact that's not true. And the snippet that Google highlights under MSG dangers is actually from a physician that was warned by the FDA to stop making false claims about this as well as other things. So the way that you phrase a search is hugely important. And so I want to talk about that just a little bit more before we move forward. So you want to avoid asking questions that imply a certain answer. So a good example of this is, and they've actually changed this search because this has been such a common example. So Google does change its algorithm based on stuff like this. So this is a little hard to replicate at this point, but in the past, if you were to search, did the Holocaust happen, you get a lot of stuff suggesting that it didn't. And it's because we're sort of asking a question where it's like, well, maybe it didn't. And so we get a bunch of stuff saying, maybe it didn't, or it didn't at all. Now, if you do this, you get a lot of good information. And it's because people kind of have freaked out about it a lot because it's not good. But if you really wanted information on the Holocaust, like probably a better search would just be Holocaust and start there. Read summaries that show you how we know what happened, look at images, that kind of thing. That would be a better way to approach it. You want to avoid using terms that imply a certain answer. So for example, if we search women 72 cents on the dollar, we're going to get tons of stuff saying that women make 72 cents on the dollar. If we search women 80 cents on the dollar, we're going to get a bunch of stuff saying that women make 80 cents on the dollar. So which is it? Maybe it's neither. Maybe we just need to search wage gap or gender wage gap or something like that and start there, and then try to come up with whatever, if that's the actual stat we're trying to get, then come up with that stat from there. Another example, avoid culturally loaded terms. And so this has been talked about quite a bit, but it can be pretty alarming. So as an example, if you search the term Black on white crime, that is a term used by white supremacist groups. It's not a term generally used by sociologists. So what you get is a lot of white supremacy websites when you search that term. And indeed, Dylan Roof, the Charleston church shooter, actually had a number of journals that people read after the fact, and it was shown that one of his turns to white supremacy was searching Black on white crime and finding what he described how pervasive this issue was, when in fact it's just not really an issue at all. Like actually in race crime is more statistically significant, or is just more common than Black on white crime. That's why it's not a term used by sociologists, because it's not really a thing academics think we need to be worried about in any way. So, but it's something that definitely turns someone to extremist views that we actually know turn someone to extremist views. So that's how important our words are when we're searching something. Plan to reformulate. I love how it brings me to that. Plan to reformulate. So this is something that I do constantly as a librarian. I am asked questions that I don't know the answer to, and sometimes about information I've never engaged with, and I just know nothing about. And so that's why I always reformulate my search. I always think of other ways to phrase it. It's super important because it's going to help me avoid confirmation bias. It's going to help me get additional sources that I might not have caught otherwise by locking into really specific terminology. So sometimes I will even have a thesaurus pulled up next to me and looking at other ways to phrase things, just to help me get better search results, better searches. And you can also scan the results you've been getting for better terms. That happens all the time, where I start scanning and I'm like, oh, it seems like people are more frequently calling it X. Let's try that. Then I do that search and it's a gold mine. So really, your words matter when you're doing searching. Just keep that in mind, please. I want to point out that there are filter bubbles. A filter bubble just kind of happens when websites make use of algorithms to selectively assume the information that you want to see. So one of the reasons that I don't like to use Google search is because it will change how it presents my results based on things I've clicked on in the past. I don't like that. I would rather have a search engine pretend that they don't know me at all and just try to show me the most what they think is most relevant, not what they think is most relevant to me. And the reason for that is that you can get stuck in these sort of bubbles, and you can read more about this. I have a whole presentation linked to from your resources page if you want to check this out and read more about it. But there's a lot of ways that you can get out of your filter bubble. You can actually just Google how to get out of my filter bubble, and there's lots of suggestions for how to do it. One way is not using Google. One way is not using Google when you're signed in to your Google account or your Gmail account. That's pretty important. Don't stay signed in, because it's gonna track it's gonna watch kind of what you're doing and then change its behavior based on that. And it could just, if you're someone who leans left all the time, is always clicking on left-leaning stuff, it's gonna be like, oh, you want to see left-leaning stuff, here you go. Or like for me as a reference librarian, sometimes I would search like, I want car dealerships in Kentucky, and like even though I put Kentucky in there, it's like it shows me one full page of car dealerships in Oregon, and I'm like, I know you know I'm in Oregon, that's not what I'm looking for. So more innocuous example, but the filter bubbles can be really serious and cause a lot of problems, and it's one of the reasons that a lot of people think that we're sort of hunkering down into our respective liberal versus progressive versus right-leaning versus whatever. Like we're kind of all getting just really partisan, basically. And one of the arguments for why that's happening is the existence of filter bubbles. So I encourage you to think about that and try to get out of it. Something else to remember is just rather than Googling everything, think about where you might go for good information on a topic before you actually start. So for example, you're looking for health information, maybe try the National Library of Medicine, maybe try Medline Plus, maybe try Healthline, which is a pretty decent health website. Can't think of somewhere to start other than Google, maybe try Wikipedia. Like I said, go into those further readings and resources and references, see what they're citing there. And also ask a librarian. Like we are answering questions on all kinds of information all the time. So you might be surprised at websites that I just know offhand are good. But say you don't want to approach me at all, which I really wish you would, because I like answering questions and all librarians do. Don't be scared to ask a librarian a question. You can also try a website like Internet Scout. This is actually one of the only ones I know that's doing a good job of website curation at this point. If you go to their archives, that website there, they do a weekly newsletter of the best of the web. It tends to be a little bit academic heavy, but there is a lot of general interest links there too. You can search their archives and find really reputable sites there. So that might be something you want to check out. And then just a note, I don't want to go too far into it because I'm already running out of time. E-resources, the library subscribes to many different e-resources such as Consumer Reports, Reference USA as a directory. We subscribe to many news sites that you can search all in one, or news articles, I should say, not the actual sites, but the news articles that were published. You can search many at one time. If you ever want to start your research with a library e-resource, you just need a library card to do so, and you can sign up for one online. Here's back to original context. We're not going to get nearly as much time as I want on this, but that's okay. Let's go for it. So one big thing with reporting these days online is that there's so much reporting on reporting. And just here's a really simple example. It's where a news site just says, hey, this news site is saying this. And you're like, okay, great. And like many websites do this, like big ones like CNN, Fox News, they all do it. So like this is just an example, like this is something that was being reported on from the Daily Dot. Fortunately, like if you click on where it says the Daily Dot reported Friday, it takes you straight to the Daily Dot's reporting, and the Daily Dot did a really good job of showing you exactly what they were using to say all of this. So where they got the evidence from, basically. So you can see their full Freedom of Information Act request and all that stuff. So just a note that like if you don't want to just take what one article is saying at face value, like see where are they getting that information from. Frequently they're getting it from another news outlet. If you follow it back, you can often get to the original source, the original context. Just a really quick note to pay attention to sponsored content. Frequently people like, so this Network World is a pretty reputable computer science website, related website. And they have like lots of sponsored articles frequently at the bottom of the page, but these are not from Network World. So if we wanted to say, like, we can't say like that lawmakers concerned about insane military scope. If we click on that article there, that's not actually from Network World. We would need to see who actually wrote that information. InfoWorld has a similar one. Like they've got this full article there, but it's a sponsored article by someone who works for HPE, I believe. So it's just, I mean, you can definitely read it and take it for what it's worth, but it's important to know that because they have something that they're trying to promote or get you to go to. You're not within the original context. This is not an InfoWorld generated article. So let's do an example where we actually trace back to some original context. So this is just showing you two different tweets. The one on the left here is an example of a pretty good one because they cite their source, they give you the chart, they show you where the source of the data is. This is kind of like the best tweet ever. And I think what's funny too is that it only has like 6 retweets and 5 likes because people don't want factual good information online. I'm kidding, but it's stuff that people maybe just don't respond to as much. On the right, a lot of people responded to this. It's just someone named Dead Boyfriend on Twitter saying, post this picture, this is the life of a National Geographic photographer. So what if we wanted to find out, like, is this a real photo? Is that actually a National Geographic photographer? What if we want to know more about this photo? Like, how could we proceed? What would we do? Well, one way to do it is we can actually reverse image search. So on Google, or Google Images, I should say, if you go to images.google.com, there's a little camera on there. And if you can get a link to the image, or if you can save the image somewhere, you can post it, you can upload it and then have Google search for the actual image. It's pretty cool. If you have Chrome, if you're using Google Chrome as your web browser, you can usually just right click on the image and you'll get a search Google for image thing. So, and that's what we did in this case. We right clicked on it and I was using Chrome. I hit search Google for image. If I wanted to do it the other way, I just get the link to the image, paste it in there, and we do a search. So what happens when we do that search? This is 2 screenshots, but this is actually all one long page. I just couldn't get it all right on top of each other and you actually be able to see it. So if we search for, so interestingly, when we searched for that image, it pulled out some random text that it had associated with the image. And in this case, it pulled out funniest, the floor is lava. So those are not very good search terms, right? But we're going to address that here in a second. One thing to note about the way that these search results come out is that at the very top, it just actually shows some random links associated with the terms that it put in there. So these top 2 on the left, those top 2 links that come out under the image, those are search results for funniest, the floor is lava. If we actually scroll down, it's almost at the bottom of that page where we actually get the results we were looking for. So it's under the visually similar images. On the right-hand side, you see pages that include matching images. And then we have kind of these, we have 2 links from veryfunnypics.eu. So that really doesn't seem like a very legitimate site. It doesn't really, they look like just sites where you're just gonna see pictures, like not someone explaining to me what's going on with this image. So we've got to change something about this search to get something more relevant because we don't want to go to page 2 or page 3 of these search results, right? We're too lazy. So I took out funniest the floor is, just lava. Let's just search lava. And actually, I'm curious if we could have just searched no terms at all. I mean, maybe you could have, and I just didn't do that. So searching for lava, scroll down to the pages that include matching images. And the very top there, the origin of the viral volcano photographer comes up. I don't know anything about popphoto.com, but that's not really important here. We're not necessarily looking for the most trusted coverage. I'm just looking for more information to help me get at where this photo came from. So if we see what it says, we actually find something very useful in there, and it's the supposed name of the photographer that's in the photograph, and it's I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right. It's Kawika Singson. And so what I did is I took those terms, went back to my search, and I put his name in there, Kawika Singson. I left lava in there. Do a search, and in fact, I don't even have to scroll down anymore. I get the second link there, photographer admits to faking lava photographer on fire. Again, it's from a website I don't know much about, but I'm just trying to figure out where did this come from? Can I find any original? I'm just trying to find the context. So let's go there, let's see what that says. And I really luck into it again, because within the second paragraph, it tells me now in telephone interviews with the likes of CNN and CBS, Singson has actually discussed this and said that the image was staged. Still, I don't know anything about this particular site, and they're doing some reporting on reporting. So I'm trying to get the original context. So I'm going to go to CNN. I could have gone to the CBS one too. I picked the CNN one. I went there, and indeed, I get that image, and I get the whole story behind it. You even get a recorded interview with him that you can listen to. You find out all about it, and they cite their source as a local news source. And if you follow that local news source, it's actually a local Hawaii site. Oops. And this Hawaii News Now, sometimes when you search for a local site, if it's reputable and known, it sometimes will come up with a little, they call this a knowledge bar on the right. Hawaii News Now, it tells us a little bit about it, but this is a legitimate local news site. We could have done more research to try to figure it out, but it was pretty clear just right off the bat that this seemed like a legitimate news site. So what we find out is that someone set his feet on fire and took the photo for him. He was standing on lava, but no, his feet did not catch on fire. And his tripod did not catch on fire. They'd set all this up, took the picture, and he was just trying to get a really cool picture for his Facebook cover photo. And it got posted to Twitter, and then it just got shared so many times that this became something people were like, wait, what's going on in this photo? Because it wasn't very clear. So that's that. I think we can get through a little bit more. Okay, we're doing better than I thought. Okay, I just want to point out that you can search all TV news transcripts to verify if someone ever said something, to see what someone might have said in interviews over time. The Internet Archive is keeping all of this. There was one example that I used to use a lot is on YouTube. There was this video that supposedly showed Donald Trump speaking about a picture of the annual pilgrimage to Mecca, and he described it as a tremendous sea of love. But if you search those terms at the TV News Transcript Archive, if you search tremendous sea of love, you'll find that someone just photoshopped the image of the annual pilgrimage to Mecca into what he was looking at in that video. He was actually looking at an image of his inauguration. So not talking about the pilgrimage to Mecca. So it's just sometimes a way that you can sort of verify, you can kind of verify TV news videos, you can verify what people have been saying, that kind of thing. Just a cool resource I want to point out. I want to point out that there's books.google.com, and it's called Google Books. You can search for lines in a book and often find where that line originated. It's pretty handy. So on the left, someone saying that Carl Sagan said this particular quote, but doesn't cite it, doesn't tell you anything about it. We throw a little bit of that quote into Google Books. We try to pull out something that's pretty distinct from it. So clutching our crystals and nervously consulting seemed kind of distinct, pulled it out. And indeed, if you do a little bit of looking there, I believe the first 3 books were just simply citing that quote in Demon Haunted World, which is a book by Carl Sagan. So you kind of find where that originated from. Deep fakes, I'm actually not going to have us watch this simply because we're running out of time, but you may have heard of, more than likely you have, videos that are just really essentially, or in many ways almost entirely faked. Yeah, you can put someone's face over someone else's face. You can use your voice to, in a way, the way that the software works, it'll make your voice sound like that person's voice, and it will look like what you are saying is coming out of that person's voice. The fake video I was going to show you, there's a link to it here so you could watch it, but it's Jordan Peele impersonating President Obama pretty compellingly. And the reason that he did it is because he wanted to let people know like how easy it is to create something like that. And he has President Obama say things that he would never say. There are some things that you can kind of, deep fakes can be a little bit hard to trace back to original context. They can be sometimes even difficult to spot. However, there are some questions that you can ask yourself when you're looking at a video at any time, especially if you have any suspicion about it. So is their mouth moving too little? Does their voice sound off? Do they move in like a jerky kind of fashion that doesn't seem real? Do they look like a video game? How do they look in a real video? Like pull up the video you have questions about and a video you know is legitimate. Look at them side by side. What are the differences there? Do you see any? Consider the source of the video itself. Are other people sharing that same video? If it's President Obama saying crazy things, like why isn't anyone else posting that video? That's a good question. So checking where else it is and isn't online. And then also sometimes just slow motioning the video. You almost always in YouTube and other video places that you're watching stuff, you can slow it down, and that slowing it down can kind of show you like this looks really odd and strange. There's lots of other, those are just some of the ways that you can try to kind of deduce whether or not it's fake. Something else that's kind of interesting is this YouTube data viewer, and the link there on the bottom. If you throw in a link to a video from YouTube there, what it does is it grabs all the metadata about the video, which for a lot of lay people is not very useful, but for some people it can kind of tell you things like when it was originally posted, stuff like that. But that's less important. What's more interesting about it, I think, is that it grabs still images from the video, and it'll grab several of them. And then when you click on that image, you can do a reverse image search for that. So that's kind of, so if you're ever just like, who's talking about this video? What's happening with this video? Throw it into the Amnesty International's YouTube data viewer, throw the link. It has to be a YouTube one for it to work for this particular thing. So it's not gonna work for all videos. And then do some of those reverse image searches using the using the stills that it gives you. It's actually really easy to use, and if I had more time, I'd show it to you. I've only got about 3 minutes left. Oh, I'm so glad I actually made it through everything. These last few things were just, we would do them if we could. but I want to give you guys some time for questions. Let me just talk about this one, and then I actually have a full link where you can do this one on your own. So this here got shared quite a bit about Joe Biden being wired during the debate. And so it got amplified quite a bit by celebrities. The actor James Woods posted this. So I'm not sure how much I emphasized this earlier, but amplification is so important. Like when a celebrity or a politician amplifies something like this, a lot of people take it as truth when in fact this isn't true, and it was fact checked as well. But people got the still, and they decided it was a wire that he was wearing. They got another still on his wrist that I'm not showing here, that they were saying was an IV. You can see something kind of sticking out right here, and they said it was an IV. So you can actually see the video of this moment in context, but it's a shadow. What this thing that they're saying is a wire, this close-up of the video, it's a shadow. It's a crease in his shirt, and then the shadow of that crease. If you look at the video of the moment in context, that's pretty obvious, but when you slow it down and try to take pictures of it, you can kind of make it look like anything you want. So just a good example of like taking something totally out of context. If you want to read a fact check of this, you can, but I just thought it was an interesting one. It was kind of crazy how much this got shared and talked about. I even saw it in my own Facebook feed, and it's just simply not true. It's just someone taking something completely out of context, stripping it of all its context, and saying, here, it's a wire. And if you actually watch the video, you're like, oh, it's just a crease in his shirt. So try this one out on your own. I have the link. Yeah, I have that on this little slide here. Try this exercise on your own or with others. It's a great exercise. It'll give you just another example of how so frequently images and videos are taken completely out of context and given entirely new context. So this, in short, is not what he says it is. This is a protest in South Africa. South African bikers all kneeling and praying for murdered farmers. But I check it out because the way that it gets fact checked is pretty interesting. And so I have a summary of the strategies here you can check out. It's noon right now. I'm sorry I didn't give us very much time for questions, but I'm happy to stick around for a question or two if I've still got you here. So that's all I had. But if you have any questions or anything at all, please don't hesitate to send me your questions. Let's see, I am going to send a follow-up email that will include this entire presentation, as well as ways to contact me, these slides, and all the other handouts that I provided. So hopefully this was informative to you. Let's see, I got one question yet. Yay, thank you, Casey. You're the best. Okay. Well, if there are no specific questions, thank you all so much for joining me. I hope this was useful to you. Once I do send the video to all of you, you can share it with others too if you think that they would benefit from it. I think that's really the key with fake news stuff is we've got to be talking to each other about this stuff. Something that I used to talk about in this presentation but didn't have time for is that how a Pew study recently just showed like how few people are talking to other people about politics anymore. And that's a problem. Like we need to be willing to talk to each other and engage with each other on these topics. And we need to talk to each other about how important fake news is and misinformation in news. And we all have a responsibility not to share it. So good luck, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.